Hey travelers, Mag and I here on day 273 of our trip around the United States.
Today, we will be taking on the southeast corner of Kansas while we cover 270 miles through this corner of the state. We're starting right now from right out here on the edge of McCune, and we'll be working our way south and east until we hit Scammon. From Scammon, we're going to be making a steady track west across the southern edge of the state, through Independence, Cedar Vale, and into Arkansas City before we come up north just a little bit to bring our day to an end somewhere between Winfield and Oxford. Now, it has warmed up quite a bit out here today, so temperature-wise, it's very decent. But we are getting that famous Kansas wind today. It is whipping us all over the road, and it is completely unforgiving. However, as you know, if we weren't going to let a blizzard full of wind stop us, we're certainly not going to let a full sunshiny day worth of wind stop us either. We're going to continue on today, making our way through our geocache targets, one county and one page at a time, until we get to the end of our route. We've got a lot of cemeteries coming up once again, so we expect to see a lot of cemetery hides. We got a few county seats, and we actually have quite a few virtuals, so we're expecting to get to see some historic sites this morning. But either way, I'm just a happy camper that the weather has warmed up. This wind, whatever, we'll deal with it as it is, as long as we're not freezing our buns off. So let's get out there and see what the southeast corner of Kansas has in store for us today. Come on, let's go.
We begin this morning's adventure just outside of McCune in the far southeast corner of Kansas. There is not much to see out on this stretch except for fields, which are between crops, and cemeteries. Fortunately for us, while many of those fields are barren of hides, the cemeteries often feature at least one geocache for us to be able to pick up for the county. Our drive through the fields, farms, and headstones carries us from McCune through Cherokee and Scammon, out West Mineral, past Oswego, and all the way through Mound Valley. It is good to see that despite how lonely this corner of Kansas is, there's at least 2 or 3 options to choose from in each county we pass through. That is due in no small part to hiders like Baron Driver, who have made an effort to ensure there are hides available all over the state. Finally, we find ourselves coming into the city of Independence, the county seat of Montgomery County, with a population of about 8,500 people. Named for the Declaration of Independence, this city was settled on land purchased from the Osage in September of 1869. The purchaser, George Brown, had named the town site Colfax after Schuyler Colfax, the vice president under President Ulysses Grant. By the time the city had been incorporated and designated as the county seat in 1870, the name had been changed to Independence. This would have actually been a quick in and out city too, except for a lab named the Statues of Penn Avenue. What I have started doing is pretty much any time I come into a small town like this, I click on the Adventure Lab icons just to see what the names are. There are certain names that immediately grab my attention, and if it says statues or murals, you can bet I'm probably pulling up the Adventure Lab app to see where they're going to bring me. Lacking a density of hiding places in downtown areas, sometimes the Adventure Lab stages make the perfect way to be able to send people on a tour to some of the best sights to see. The Adventure Lab here delivered with not only 5 great stages, but an Adventure Lab bonus and an even better 6th stage. On the way to our next stop, we come by the little house on the Prairie Museum, which has just opened for the season. The museum keeps alive the memory of Laura Ingalls Wilder, who lived from February of 1867 to February of 1957. She was author to the children's series of books, Little House on the Prairie, that published between 1932 and 1943. Each of the stories are based on her childhood growing up in the American Midwest between Wisconsin, Kansas, Minnesota, South Dakota, and Missouri between 1870 and 1894. This museum features a reconstructed cabin of the site that she lived in the 1870s here in Kansas. The grounds also include an authentic one-room school from the 1870s and the original post office from nearby Wayside. Being here at the museum, watching the wind blow through the grass, looking out over the prairie, gives you a feeling of what it might have been like to be a settler here in Kansas in the late 1870s. That is exactly the feeling that Laura Ingalls Wilder is trying to convey in her Little House on the Prairie books. Written as autobiographical fiction, the books are not intended to provide a historical account. Rather, they tell a story through her eyes of what it was like to grow up here. During the telling of the story, she takes liberties with both characters and events to spin an entertaining tale. But like most works of fiction, the story originates from people, places, and things that were very real to the author. Reading about what it was like for her to grow up then, and looking around this museum, it feels like it was such a long time ago.
In the bigger picture though, 150 years is not all that long of a time. And yet, it is mind-boggling to consider just how much has changed in those 150 years. This had me wondering how a generation 150 years from now will look back on the way we lived at the current time. Will the idea of driving from one county to the next seem primitive by comparison to their mode of transportation? There are few better places to ponder existential questions like this than at the little house on the Prairie Museum. We next head toward the small town of Cedar Vale in Chautauqua County with a population of about 500 people. On the way there though, we noticed what appeared to be a rock jutting out of the landscape. Except it's not a rock at all. This is the Chautauqua Gemstone, a very unique geological feature that is not only the site of a virtual and traditional, but also an earth cache. Coming into Cedar Vale itself, it is quiet, very quiet. There are no cars on the streets and not many people to speak of. However, it still did have that small town hospitality that we have come to know and love. One of the very few people that we saw on the street, noticing that we weren't from around here, asked if we needed any help. Of course, as soon as we told them that we were here geocaching, they knew exactly what the game was. It would seem that I am far from the first person who has come into town acting strangely only to try adding my name to logbooks. Though I am probably one of the only ones that spent this long touring through the Veterans Memorial before moving on.
The rest of our afternoon, much like our morning, would feature beautiful drives through lonely fields and a lot of geocaches on the stretches between. I was more or less on my own this time around as Ai-chan simply didn't feel like helping all that much. She'd pop her head up from the passenger seat just to make sure I was doing okay every now and then, but for the most part, she just enjoyed herself a nap while I continued to make the stops, working my way from one find to the next. I will just have to count myself lucky that most of the hides I came across were simple enough to track down without having to pull her out of the car and sniff them down for me instead. On final approach to end our day, we find ourselves coming into Arkansas City, the county seat of Cowley County, with a population of about 12,000 people. The city found here today sits on the site of Etzanoa, an ancestral city of the Wichita people, which can be traced all the way back to 1450 and may have had as many as 20,000 people living here. They lived along the Walnut River, with signs of their settlements to be found for at least 6 miles along its banks. It wasn't until the 1860s when the first European American settlers began to move to the area. The town itself was first established in 1870 with a host of potential names including Adelphia, Cresswell, and Walnut City before Arkansas City was eventually decided upon. The first major boom in the population came in about 1881 when the Florence, El Dorado, and Walnut Valley Railroad Company extended their line into Arkansas City. The population increased from there at a fairly steady rate until 1891 when it exploded entirely. In anticipation of the upcoming Cherokee Strip land run, many thousands of people moved here. Just up the road from there, we come into Winfield, the county seat of Cowley County, with a very similar population to Arkansas City with about 12,000 people living here. Our only real target into town was to visit this mural, which is the site of a virtual published over 20 years ago. After seeing that beautiful mural though, I had my suspicions that there would be many others just waiting for us to discover if we went out and explored the town a little bit. So that's exactly what we did. We hopped from one spot to the next, just looking for splotches of color peeking out at us from around the edges of buildings, letting us know there was a mural to be found. In much the same way, we are encouraged to take just a short 10-minute detour down the road into Oxford, a very small city in Sumner County with a population of about 1,000 people. Here we find ourselves touring the old Oxford Mill, once again in pursuit of a virtual that was published more than 20 years ago. Built in 1875, this mill was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1982. And while tours on the inside are no longer available, you can still do a full walk around the mill from the outside. Having made fairly decent time throughout the day, we decide to jump into tomorrow's plan with what's left of our daylight. This part of the state plays host to the Kansas State Star GeoArt, 51 mystery caches that are formed in the shape of a star on the map. They are all fairly easy solves, which turn into parking grabs located right along the side of the road.
All right, it looks like that is going to do it for Aichan and I, enjoying another day out here on the road in Kansas. Somehow, today was even quieter than yesterday. Even when we came through the cities, we kind of skirted around the edges. We didn't see many statues or murals or other interesting sights. We kind of just went and grabbed our geocache targets and moved straight through. We did get to see a couple of interesting things in some of the spots along the way today, and I always appreciate what we do get to see. Beside that, because we kept speeding through our day as much as we did, we ended up getting far enough ahead to take on some of tomorrow's plan, doing the Kansas State Star GeoArt. We've grabbed a handful of them, we've already missed a couple, and the rest of the plan for the day tomorrow is to finish off this GeoArt. But rather than doing that, I know that we will benefit from having an additional day in our pocket. I am now more confident of that than ever before. So we're gonna scrap the plan for tomorrow to do the Kansas State Star and continue right on the route from there. That'll put us 2 days ahead of schedule from this point on. Thank you guys for joining us as we continue to move across southern Kansas over the next few days. Like this video, subscribe to stay tuned for daily updates, and we'll see you out on the trails.